That sounds cool. That sounds cool. Yes?
How would that work with an unreliable narrator?
Read Amelia Peabody, Elizabeth Peters, their mysteries. She has the best unreliable narrator in the business because she's a very Victorian woman. She is a archaeologist. She's an archaeologist. She has an archaeology husband. Elizabeth Peters is a pseudonym for Barbara Mertz, who is an archaeologist, a PhD archaeologist, and she knows the history of archaeology. But the main thing is this is a very Victorian woman, and she is really Victorian. And she'll have these wonderful scenes, like she goes in to talk to the head of archaeology in Egypt to get permissions to do a dig. Now, she and her husband are very strong-minded people, and a lot of people run away when they see them. So she comes into the office, and she notices there's nobody, or there's a secretary there who says, "Oh, Inspector," or I think it was Budge at the time. Professor Budge is not here, and he wants you to leave a message. And she looks over and she sees his shoes sticking out from the curtains. Okay. And she says, "Well, tell Inspector Budge that you know, it would save him a lot of time and trouble if he would just send the permissions to our camp to do the digging in the place we would like to do it in." And to her, she's just very forceful, and you know that people are terrified of her, but she doesn't. It's like it doesn't. It just goes whoosh. In her head, she's this very respectable Victorian woman, and you know, as a reader, she's terrifying. Absolutely terrifying to everybody around her. It's a remarkable series of books. I highly recommend them. They're great mysteries.
So the deal there is the reaction of the surrounding cast compensates for the person's misconception about themselves.
Right. So we can tell by the reactions of everybody else there that what's going on is not what she thinks is going on. Yeah.
Unreliable narrators are really fun and kind of tricky. I switch points of view in my books back and forth, and I really enjoy that because I love to see the same event from different perspectives, and what are different people taking from it. It's sort of part of my joy of studying people. So from a point of view of, if you've seen the scene from someone else's point of view, and then you see it from the point of view of the unreliable narrator or the less reliable narrator, less sympathetic narrator is another possibility. You can have, you get the stereo vision of the events.
Another very good book for unreliable narrators is Lorna Freeman's Covenants. It's in a Border series. Her main character is really fun, and what he tells you is going on, and what you know he thinks is going on, you find out at the very end is not really what's going on, and it's cool. She does a really good job of that.
Or the rascal narrators of Flashman books.
Yes.
The first time I encountered an unsympathetic protagonist, and but it's done in I think it's difficult to do, but I think it's fun when you can do it. I have a character called Eller I love to write, although I'm really glad that my main character, Mel, gets to punch him booked in.
Yes.
Briggs talked about expectations and going in a different direction, but doing it in a smart way. What about fulfilling reader expectations, and how important is that to a satisfying story?
Oh, that's really important. That's why J.R. Ward, Black Dagger Brotherhood, when she switched up from writing paranormal romance to urban fantasy, she got a really big reaction amongst her readers. And it's not that her readers don't enjoy urban fantasy. It's that that's not what they were expecting when they picked up her book. So I think it's, at a certain level, it's very important that you know, if I wrote a George R.R. Martin book, my readers would rise up in rebellion, even though they love George R.R. Martin, because, you know, I'm having Bunny Patty. And it's not that I don't do terrible things to my characters, because that's a really wonderful way to get story. But at the end, I always like for the reader to feel like they're in a little better place than they were when they stopped reading. So part of that is expectations you set up as a writer. And when somebody picks up a brand new book, an author that they don't know, they may or may not be comfortable with that book because they don't know how it's going to end. I read the last chapter of every book from right because I do not remember names at all. And I read the last chapter just to make sure that they're not going to be too hard on me, because when I'm a reader, I get so involved with these characters. The first and probably one of 2 times in my life I've been depressed. I was reading Stephen Donaldson's the series. Oh, and I had no experience with it. I was in high school, and I read the first, I think, 5 books in about 3 days. And I ran around for the rest of the week just like, oh my gosh, I have no idea what's wrong with me. I don't have any energy. I don't want to do anything. I'm really, really, really depressed. And I thought, wow, that's really weird. I hope it never happens again when I recovered. And then the last book came out, and I bought it, and I started reading. I'm going, oh, I know what this feels like. That's what caused it. Because he's a really great writer, and he made me feel really, really awful. And so I don't let anybody else ever doing that to me again. So I read the last chapter to make sure everything ends up happy. And I don't really pay much attention, you know, to names, so I just, and then I'm okay, and I can read it fresh from the beginning. So,
yeah, I think it's really important to not disappoint your readers. It was a series I read when I was a kid. I read 2 books in it, World Enough and Time, it was called. And the first one was the kind of thing that you really get involved in the passion between, that was a centaur and was in love with a woman. I don't remember a lot of the details now, but I remember that the feeling I ended with at the end of that book was one of, yes, that's an optimistic sci-fi, that's what I'm going for, you know, that you feel like, or SF, you can go on and take on the world because there's some meaning in life, at least in the connections between people. And then his sequel, when I picked it up and read it, it was like, I don't know what had happened to him in the meantime, but basically it was every relationship in the first book had fell apart, and everything was bad and sordid and grubby, and he must have been trying to live on the writer's income or something and got disillusioned. But I was, as a reader, disappointed and hurt, and it also ruined the first book for me. So I'm very aware. I have a good friend who's told me she's not going to read my novels until the 10th book so she can read the end of it like you do. And that really annoys me. But on the other hand, fair enough. Why do you want to get invested in people only to be sort of maimed by, you know, what happens to them, or disappointed? If something bad happens, I think it needs to be a pattern in the books that makes it possible for you to assimilate that in a meaningful way. And if there's a tension set up too, this is another way you can disappoint people. If you set up a tension and you don't deal with that, so I'm very conscious in each of my books of making sure that, although it's a 10-novel series, in each book there is a critical tension, a question of some sort, that the problem that I set up is dealt with in that book. And then they go on to the next one.
There are some things that you have to do as a writer in order to make your book really a good book for people to enjoy. One of them is your cause and effect must match, so that nothing happens just kind of happenstance. It all has to feel like it was on purpose, that there was a cause for the results you get. The second is that justice must be served. Unless you're writing a 1970s, oh my gosh, this is horrible literary kind of thing. You really, you know, like, what is it, what's the Cool Hand Luke, which is the most depressing movie in my life. This is a guy who goes out, and his crime, and you never find out why he did it, but he was chopping off the parking meters, and he's sent to jail for like 2 years or something, and he ends up dead because he and the guy in the head of the prison butt heads, and it is wonderful. It is so well done, and at the end you just want to stab yourself in the heart. Okay, but there really is this expectation, especially in the genre, especially sci-fi, fantasy genre, and mysteries for that matter, that justice will be served. The bad guys will get theirs in the end, and I think that's part of it from our own desire for there to be order in the world. That's that pattern recognition thing. We want there to be order in the world, and sometimes in the real world things happen, and there's no order. And part of the reason you read, and part of the reason you watch TV, is to reassure yourself that in this nice little safe world, escapist fantasy or escapist fiction, that there is really order. That there are, it just makes you feel better to know that there's an order and a pattern in the world.
And you have to put some, to get the pearl, you got to have some sand. I think probably one of the most controversial things I've done in my series was a character of great importance dies between books 3 and book 4. And so there's this sense of unfulfilled, what? Daimon's dead? How did that happen? And what's that about? And he haunts the rest of the series. And I did it because I I wanted two questions in particular to be unresolved and to cause tension in the survivors, and they need to resolve why he did it, and they need to understand, and then something that happens in books 9 and 10, the fact that he was so important and well loved by people, the fact that somebody clones him later on creates this feeling of disrespect, and the whole question of identity, and what always bothered me when clones are too much like the actual person. I mean, the clone is like an identical twin born 20 years later or something. So that to me was a really important engine of emotions in the story, and it isn't unresolved. It's just that, okay, it's unresolved in book 4 and 5, and 6 maybe, but it's resolved by the end of the series. So that's one of those things that is a tension that is not resolved in that book, but is part of the series arc. But I think I would have failed the Daimon lovers if I didn't resolve the tensions that his death caused by the end of the series. And so that's where I'm standing on that one.
Okay. Yeah, and you can also break expectations in a really strange and powerful way if you're good enough. How many of you watched MASH back when it first came out? Okay. Do you remember Colonel Blake? Okay, that episode, the episode where Colonel Blake goes home, they aired several times without the ending because the reaction to it was so strong. Because here he is, the whole thing's about him going off and going in, you know, and it's a comedy, but it's a comedy about war. And there was always this undercurrent of despair here and there, especially in the last couple seasons, which is why I didn't watch the last couple seasons. But in this, it was really powerful because everybody was so happy that he was going home and he got his you know, it wasn't the one where he got the suit with the pinstripes going back sideways and things like that. So anyway, he gets on this plane, and and MASH was done without a laugh track, which is one of the things that made it really powerful. It was the first comedy ever done without a laugh track. And at the very end, okay, maybe that's right? I said this so confidently, but I think that's true, right?
I think so.
Okay, all right. So we hope so. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But at any rate, at the very end of that, you know, they come back for that last little maybe 2-minute laugh at the very end, and they come out and announce that Colonel Blake's helicopter had been shot down and he was dead. And it was like you lost your best friend. You'd known him for, I don't remember how many seasons, had been there 5 or 6 seasons, I think. And it was devastating. But because this was a show about the horrors of war, it worked.
It was about the horrors of war, but about the human spirit surviving those horrors, existing in the gaps and interstitial tissue of this incomprehensibly horrible thing. So yeah, I think in that case, because of the nature of the show, it worked.